Right, and we're live. Thank you very much, Sean, for coming. This is the last of the very warm fireside chat, so don't get burned. So be careful.
I didn't even notice that until now. That's excellent.
So it's the last one of the Black Hat. Black Hat is almost coming to a close today, and we're talking with Sean Turner about the journey from practitioner to CISO, the typical challenge that us as practitioner face when we're going back to a CISO perspective, and also the advantage that gives you if you go from practitioner to CISO. But Sean, before we kick off the show, thank you so much for coming and tell us a little bit more about you.
So I've been working in security for sort of, forever, but also like 5 years or so, and then in DevOps and infrastructure for a bit longer. So the two sort of ecosystems seem to have collided quite nicely in the last few years.
Nice.
And typically people ask me to come in and help with DevOps and infrastructure and cloud infrastructure type stuff. And then they find out that they need some security expertise that I happen to have as well. and then the role kind of evolves from there. And these all tend to be sort of startup ecosystem players. So the roles are never that clearly defined.
Right.
There's a role that needs doing, and then there's other things that need doing that are not necessarily traditionally part of that role, but they just need doing, right?
Right.
So you find that it's a many hats kind of scenario. Multiple startups, serial startup employee, but never kind of an entrepreneur, and trying to convince people that you've got enough skills to do the role, the principal role, and then the other things on the side, and I think I'm finding this one quite interesting. The one that the Twinstake role that I've just taken on in the last 5-6 months, because it's the first time they've sort of said to me, "Hey, like you need to build a security function from scratch."
Right.
There is nothing here. Like this is a blank canvas, and that's really it's quite rewarding. It's interesting, quite challenging. It brings some more of a strategy back to grassroots, if you like. And
Nice.
You have to think, okay, right, what would I, if I was trying to build a security function from scratch for a company that deals with people's financial information,
Right. How would you
and assets? What would I start with? What would I buy first? What would I build first? Would I buy stuff? Would I build stuff? And how do I get that sort of basic level of hygiene?
Right.
And then how do I incrementally sort of improve that and build on that? What does this iterative building a security function like in a startup style look like, rather than the whole sort of you've got X budget. It's
enterprise
more like
way.
The enterprise way, if you like, of like you're either taking over from an incumbent and you're inheriting their budget and their incumbent tooling and their staff,
but also technology.
Or you've been said, hey, you're going to build a new function, and you've got this amount of runway. It's more like, here's an uncertain amount of runway, here's an uncertain amount of business growth. Can you build a security function that can expand and contract and scale with the business,
right,
without leaving stones unturned, if you like?
That's an interesting challenge to do.
Yeah, I think that's the crux of this current challenge. But I think the CISO role is a little bit overloaded sometimes, and it means different things to different people. So there may be people that work as a CISO that do information security leadership as their principal activity, that don't really touch a line of code.
Right.
At the same time, there'll be people that get stuck in and actually program the security tooling and build the pipelines and stuff to make this stuff work. I mean, there's a happy medium there somewhere, and different sizes and types of organisations need different skill sets. But you've got to be T-shaped. Although you've got this primary skill in whether your primary skills are in risk and compliance or your primary skills are in infrastructure and coding, you've still got to be T-shaped. You've still got to cover the other bases.
Right. You need to be wide.
Have that sort of wide spectrum of knowledge. You can't just be ignorant of the things that aren't your specialism.
Right. Because as a CISO, you have that responsibility level, and also the board is going to look at you and say, "Are we secure?"
Yeah. Yeah, it's not never going to be the easiest question to answer
Right.
at any point in time. And of course, the sophisticated answer is we're secure. We were secure based on this benchmark or this
Right.
comparison.
Or up to this level.
One of our competitors got breached in this way, and we've thought about that, and that's gone into our modelling
Mhm.
and our risk profile. We've thought about risk. We've done kind of risk modelling and thought about if as a bad actor I was going to attack my business,
Right.
what would I do? And then we tried to be as creative and using our knowledge of what the business does and how the business is put together to think that how can this be compromised? And the other part of that, the flip side of that, which normally bounces back to the other C-suite individuals, the CFO and the CEO in particular, is which of these things do we care about the most? Because
Right.
the CISO can say, look, I think there's a 8 out of 10 chance of this happening if we don't do this, and I think it's going to have a massive impact on this. But is that the thing we care about the most? Like, do we care more about losing customer data?
Right.
Obviously, everyone has to care. I'm not saying that there's an option of not caring about that, but if all of your customer data is public knowledge,
Right.
or if all of the data you store about your customers is public knowledge, and you also have other things that aren't customer data that there are other sort of existential risks, if you like, to the business that are a lot bigger than that. Like, okay, we can spend lots and lots of money on this security tooling, but that's not going to do us much good if we run out of money.
Right.
We spent all the money on security tooling, and we didn't actually build a business.
I guess that's the more existential question of a lot of startup that says, yeah, you can secure the business to the nth degree, but then you run out of runway, and what all this good security stuff. I mean, you're not gonna get hacked, but you might not exist for other reasons. And I guess that's a good point of a dynamic risk assessment of the business, that are risk against risk, and a little bit where we suffer as security professional, where we tend to maybe focus on millions of vulnerabilities or millions of problems, and presenting that is like, how is that risk comparing to me not going to market or me not having
Or like
money?
starting with AppSec when there are other things that are lower hanging fruit, if you like.
Right.
Your risk register kind of becomes a wish list of things you would like to remediate. And then you have to sort of work out the cost of remediating them and go, let's do that one first, because it's, the risk register almost gets another column, which is like, relative cost to the risk. And it's like, that one's high risk and of massive consequence to the business, and it's relatively cheap to mitigate. So let's do that first, rather than doing this one, which is high-ish risk and also of consequence to the business, but costs an absolute fortune to mitigate. And you think, well, this is a no-brainer, right? Let's have this third column idea of like, these are the low-hanging fruit here. These are the things that we can just pick off and say, this forms part of our basic security hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have multi-factor authentication.
Right.
We need to have some sort of single sign-on. We need to know who our employees are. We need to do some identity management. We need to have some privileged access management because we have systems that are considered privileged. And then once we ticked all those kind of we're green across stuff, that sort of thing, then we can start getting into the weeds of like, do all our people, we've got written policies, do all our people know what those policies are, and we done formal training, and a lot of businesses don't do that if they're relatively low hanging, but the identity management and being able to say that the right people are accessing your systems,
that can be
comes slightly before, and only slightly before, those people who are accessing your systems knowing what to do once they're in there. The idea of behaviour detection and monitoring and anomaly detection, if you like, just is like phase 2. But it's sort of, there's almost like a phase 1A of like, can we do some of this stuff early? Can we pick out some of this stuff and just say, yeah, there's little bits here that are so glaringly obvious and so consequential to the business that we're gonna cherry pick these little bits and start implementing them day one.
So if you
And parallelize it a bit, but you can only parallelize it so much.
right,
And then you the other strategic decisions about when do you start hiring people, how do you build a team? Do you build a team, or do you just say, okay, look, in a modern startup, do we have a security team, or do we have the engineers who work on the infrastructure? Do they have a dotted line to security, and do they have some responsibilities in order to?
How do you decide that, for example?
To separate the people management from the technology management, if you like, a little bit.
Right. But how do you decide when to hire a security team or when to scale a specific team? How do you decide that?
I guess, I mean, there are some things that you have choices about whether to buy or build.
Right.
That influence that decision. So, if you said, "Hey, I want to build a team as part of phase 2," rather than buy something off the shelf or get someone to build it for me, that's you as a CISO, you're probably not going to sit there and build a team because it's not.
Oh, your role.
It's not that it's not my role, because I would build an identity management system.
Right.
But it's not as rewarding, not as like there's less.
Biggest bang for bucks.
Yeah, there's less bang. It requires less of the CISO type, the strategy into tactics translation layer,
right,
and more of a nitty gritty implementation technical detail layer. That obviously one of the things, I can do it. I know how to do it. I don't really want to do it. So
what is the best use of your time?
What is the best use of your time? The best use of your time might not be some of the things you had to do right at the beginning as a startup employee, because everyone needs to have a network in the office, and that's garbage like that comes down to usually the senior team, whoever's got some technical ability. So you might have to actually get the office or the working location or the server rack. You might have to build some stuff physically and get some of that off the ground as a startup employee in general. And usually there isn't anyone else around to do things.
And how do you find that journey into a more growth startup? You get tired of actually seeing things, you get more excited about the initial stage or the later stage, or you mature?
I think that's it. I think you have to grow with the business, and in some ways, like if you're going from one startup to another, or a scale up to a startup. Right. So I went from Kraken through a couple of other organisations, but then through Firebolt, but then to Twinstake. And Kraken was big.
Yes.
It still is big, despite some layoffs and stuff. It's still quite chunky. There's a few thousand people there. Firebolt was getting up to into the thousands as well, or 500 or something.
Right, it's sizable.
Yeah, and then Twinstake is there's 20 or so of us, right?
Right.
And so you have to, when you say you have to grow with the business, it means you also sometimes have to sort of regress a bit and remember what you did when you worked at that size business before,
right.
and go, I'm going to have to do that because no one else to do it. Ordinarily, there'd be a team of people to handle that, but we don't have that luxury here.
Multi-hat.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Put a different hat on, make it work.
So you see the role of a startup is much more a wartime, getting involved, getting in the weeds with all the teams, maybe not having a team, having an extended team in the engineering, or maybe having one or two security person.
Yeah.
Versus maybe larger scale CISO or scale up CISO that start having a function.
And revisiting the concept of what a team is, or what a security team is, what a security function is, versus being in a management hierarchy where you have direct reports. It's more like, I know I can turn around to any of the infrastructure engineers and say, this is a security issue. Can you change this? And they won't say, wait, let me go and ask the infrastructure manager. They'll say, yeah, of course, because we're all in this together, right?
Right.
It's nice to have that level of teamwork and that small team vibe, and it's nice not to lose that as you grow as well, right? It's nice to have like you say, a relatively flat structure, despite the fact the role we're talking about is CISO, which clearly isn't a flat structure kind of role, but someone needs that accountability and culpability, and I think I value the accountability. I mean, ask me this after we get hacked, right? But but I value the
Say
accountability.
no CISO ever.
Yeah, I value the accountability because it forces me to think about it as an existential threat to me, to my career, to the business.
Right.
Those things are the same, right? It's like someone very kindly described the role as a meat shield yesterday. But it's like, kind of, but at the same time, more of a meat shield, but with kind of a with a multi-function tool in each hand. The meat shield
with
with
a
big
flying
gun.
sword, with 2 fiery swords and like a unicorn, maybe.
Yeah. So it's like, yes, the concept of shielding the organisation with a person, but then if that person has enough knowledge, expertise, and now they can be effective at shielding it and have the confidence that they're going to protect the organisation effectively and pragmatically, because we've got to balance, like I say, spending all the money we have on security with actually getting the operational side of the business working. There's different styles and types of business as well. So, but some businesses develop a lot of software, and the software is on the critical path. Some businesses develop less software and just run their operational type business. We're more of an operational type business, but when we do develop some software, that the software is more based on the output and the reporting tools and functionality.
Right.
So a traditional AppSec pipeline isn't the ideal kind of fit, but something where you can pull in tools, pull in testing tools and do some dynamic analysis on the infrastructure you're building, even if someone else wrote the code. Bear in mind now, we're a joint venture. One of our parent companies is one of the businesses writing the code, and they do have an AppSec landscape.
And you need to trust.
And it's an open source ecosystem. So although we're not testing code we're writing, we're testing code somebody else is writing, and we have a relationship with that somebody else in terms of a consumer, contributor, good open source kind of citizen kind of relationship. So it's good to test the code someone else has written, and to deal with your software supply chain in that kind of way. But then you have to think, okay, but what we're really worried about, if we assume, terrible assumption, but if we assume that the code, that the release of the code is reasonably well tested and it's sort of safe, it might not be secure, but it's safe.
It's safe to the degree that you're acceptable.
If you use it properly, it will be secure. That's what I mean by safe. It's safe. It's a safe tool to implement. But if we then need to think about carefully about how we actually implement that tool,
right?
And that we're not implementing it in a way that makes us insecure, through lack of understanding of how the tooling works.
Right, a hammer is not inherently dangerous or safe, but if you use it to bash your fingers,
incredibly useful tool for putting a nail into a piece of wood or for caving someone's head in. But most people use it for the first use.
And we're not advising here to actually misuse.
Most adults use it for the first use case. But if you gave it to a 2-year-old child, they would just hit random things with it.
That's a good point. If you don't know how to use an open source tool and you point it in the wrong direction, if you use it in the wrong way, it could backfire.
Yeah, and the more you automate and do things programmatically, the bigger things tend to backfire. So it's like you need to have some guardrails around allowing people to run, like, you're running one of this service, you want to scale up to 100. How confident are you that the one that you're running at the moment is implemented correctly? Because once you scale it up to 100, you can have 100 times the problems if you've got it wrong at this point.
That's not great, especially with container security and container. If you spin it once and has a problem, then you're multiplying your attack surface like 100 times.
Yeah. And we had something the other day, we had to scale something we'd done once up to 26.
Yeah, right.
And 26 doesn't sound like that big a number, but actually just tailing 26 lots of logs without the right tooling and in a kind of an incident environment, and those 26 things talk to another half a dozen things. So the combinatorial exposure, they're all the same, but they're working out which one's broken if your monitoring isn't perfect.
Right.
And fine-tuning your monitoring and getting your monitoring perfect, so you know which one's broken, rather than just that one of them is broken.
Yeah, but usually you don't do that in live, right? You do that before that, what happened in startup, you tend to discover a lot of new stuff.
I guess
when it's on fire.
What you tend to do is your development environment will have a number of these things.
Yes.
And maybe it has 10. But your development environment doesn't have like the collateral on the line. It doesn't use real assets. So, and what you find in the crypto and the blockchain ecosystem is that production things don't behave like test things. Because production things have real users. And they have more nodes, and it's more of a competitive kind of, like, not confrontational, but there's more of a competitive landscape in the production side of things. There are other people trying to make money doing the same thing as what you're doing. Whereas in the test thing, there are other people trying to test things and break things. But there aren't other people trying to be adversarial, if you like.
Right.
And so it's a very good open source community and an open, globally distributed effort to run some of these things, but they're not completely without conflict. And one of the projects that we work on had 2 developers just removed the other day from the maintainers because they fell out with the others. And you think, well, that's quite a real threat in the open source ecosystem. I mean, it's a real threat to businesses as well. Like, people leave, people get fired, people have health problems, whatever. But in the open source ecosystem, there's more transparency about that when it happens, but there's less transparency about what's bubbling up to cause it to happen. You haven't got a HR team to deal with it, right? You just know, hey, we just lost sort of welcome to free and open source software.
All right, yeah.
People can just choose, like one of the Node.js developers decided that he'd had enough of people criticizing his project, so he removed it from GitHub.
And then all of a sudden,
everybody's software broke.
Wow. I guess that's a supply chain, but that's an interesting part of the supply chain that I think we're not looking right now. There is threat modeling on the supply chain, and what are the threats we could face? Because
how much you could trash somebody's infrastructure by just changing a few lines of code in an upstream dependency that nobody ever really worries about. I mean,
DDoS in Node recently.
We've seen it enough with OpenSSL type vulnerabilities, and it's just the next level of that stuff, isn't it? Somebody publishes a Node.js module, it gets popular, and then somebody maliciously changes it to do something that it shouldn't. And there's there's been some press about from companies like your Sneak type companies that monitor this stuff, saying, "Oh yeah, we found a Bitcoin miner in this one." It's like, probably wasn't a very effective Bitcoin miner, but
you haven't seen a lot of transactions.
I suppose if you run it across,
I guess so.
Probably some other type of crypto miner that you thought was a Bitcoin miner, or you just decided to call it a Bitcoin miner because the public would understand that.
Right, a crypto miner rather than ransomware, rather than
it was probably Monero or something. Yeah, some sort of security coin type, kind of secrecy coin.
So how you seen in the crypto space, because it's a very particular space, and what are the kind of top 3 threats that you can see in this space that are traditionally not seen in other spaces? Like you mentioned, the open source community or internal team, but also, there is a lot more attention from attackers on breaking this new finance method.
I think the most specific to cryptocurrency and the Ethereum-like ecosystem threats are around smart contracts and abuse of smart contracts, and the concept of an audited smart contract still not necessarily being safe if you give it to a 2-year-old and tell them to hit something with it, right?
So we're not recommending
that again
to hit people
or to invoke smart contracts, really, unless it's just pressing enter. Because if you put the wrong parameters in, it doesn't matter how well audited it is.
Still a contract.
Maybe you just sent the money to someone else. So the smart contract, there's the custody angle of like whether you're custodial or not, what custodial actually means, and basically having reserves and proof of reserves and all of that stuff that's come up through the media recently with all the FTX stuff happening. Of like, when I give this exchange my money to look after, are they actually looking after it, or are they giving it to their mates to lose on the open market, or whatever it was that may have happened there? But then more specific to what we're doing to the staking operations is the slashing risk, which is a weird hybrid of like the normal crypto risks of like losing crypto, putting your keys in the wrong place, letting your keys get into the wrong hands, or just losing them. A weird combination of that, so like not being able to withdraw the funds again, or not being able to unstake because you lost the keys, and then the losing client principal funds. So although we're non-custodial, if we get slashed, it's not our money that gets drained, it's the clients.
Right.
And slashing is the reason for slashing, the reason for its existence is because proof of stake, there's supposed to be something at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just say, I'll put $10 million of this crypto up for staking,
right,
but there's no risk to your principal, then you could just say, actually, I'm going to just all these things that I'm signing, I'm just going to use the same assets to sign over here as well. I'll run one in this region, one in this region,
right,
and I'll delegate. I'll use the same private keys to sign them. So this double signing thing of like, okay, so I had 10 million stake, I'm now getting the rewards from a 20 million stake because I'm double signing and there's no penalty for double signing.
Right.
If there's a penalty for double signing and it's punitive, you're not going to do that intentionally. But then if someone can induce double signing, if someone can induce downtime, so a DDoS attack,
right,
which a DDoS attack is a traditional ecosystem problem, it's a Web2 problem, right? But against a staking operation, a DDoS attack can be quite painful as well because there are slashing penalties for downtime,
right,
on a lot of the chains. So the idea is that the chain remains stable and up and usable because people are incentivized to keep their infrastructure up, and so you keep the 51% or 67% of nodes that are working and in sync and signing,
right,
depending on the algorithm. You keep that ecosystem alive, kind of thing. And yeah, if people get it wrong, again, they lose. It's client principle they're losing, and they'll, as a staking business, as a staking business, if that happens, we probably have to, like we did at Kraken at the exchange.
right.
If we lost clients' money, we sort of put our hands up and reimbursed it, right?
Right.
And that's the sort of thing that I don't know if we're obliged to do. I don't deal with the business terms and conditions legal side, but if we want to keep that customer, so we're losing the client's money, but actually it's going to come out of our pockets.
Right.
And so again, it's another existential risk because 5% of the client's stake might be more than we happen to have in the bank at that point.
Right. Or ever, potentially.
Well, yeah, if we do it really badly. But yeah, I guess the point there is that it does grow over time, and if the stakes keep growing, we carry on making money. We can make an awful lot of money, but still not reach that, being able to reimburse that 5% of a really large staking pool. So, like, one of our competitors has 10 million of a coin that's valued at. No, it's bigger. So they've got like orders of magnitudes more than us on the chain where you can be slashed 5%.
Okay.
And so their slashing risk is horrendous, yeah. And I think they potentially have some insurance around that, like with a provider, which we've been looking at. We've been working with an insurance company to try and come up with like, here's all the things we've done to try and prevent it from happening. But if it does happen to us, is this something you can underwrite? And there's an understanding problem there. Is
insurance covering that market right now with the whole FTX, with the whole crypto exchange drama?
I think they're still interested in covering it because to them it looks like financial services business, and it looks like something that could be a growth area, which is why we built a startup in it, right?
And you've seen more due diligence or more attention from insurers on that market?
I mean, I've seen not just crypto specific, but I think information security wise, based on conversations I've had with other InfoSec leaders, insurance companies are getting more and more interested in what you're actually doing to secure your business. Their questionnaires are getting a little bit more taxing, a little bit more time consuming to fill out.
Right.
And I did suggest to someone the other day on one of the groups that we're on that if they want to build a security strategy from scratch, maybe they can ask their insurance company for one of their checklists. They can go down that, and that will give them some ideas. I mean, other than the other great things to build a security strategy from scratch are things like NCSC, 10 steps to cybersecurity, ISO 27001, although it's obviously not as easy to digest as the thing that's designed for the board to read. Cyber Essentials, which pretty much comes from 10 steps.
Yeah.
And is a certification that's based on that. All of that kind of ecosystem. Yeah. So there's places, there's help out there. Right. But I did think that the taking the insurance company's attitude towards what you should be doing, if your goal is to be covered, it's not a bad start.
You get security done regardless, right?
But then you've got to think about the risks that are more specific to your own business. Right. And there's always going to be nuanced things where the risk to your business in a certain area is so much higher, and other things that you can sort of not disregard, but you can put them towards the bottom of the pile because you don't operate that type of business. You don't have customer support agents,
right?
So you don't have people. You don't have people who are relatively not low paid, but people who are relatively like junior in the organisation, in front of a computer with access to stuff they potentially shouldn't have. You don't have that end of the role-based access control spectrum.
Right.
But you have the higher end of that role-based access control system spectrum in terms of like what should your C-suite people see, what should your engineers have access to. And when your engineers say, I need access to do this to do my job, do you just give it, or do you say, okay, we can have it, but it expires in 2 hours? Right. Or do you do a break glass type system? How do you sort of give engineers access to things where you know that you're giving that engineer access to something that fundamentally can damage the business quite badly? So, if they get something wrong, you trust them not to get something wrong, but you don't necessarily trust whoever's got onto their laptop and breached it with that level of access. You know, the APT scenario, and things can all people make mistakes, and we train people as much as we can, and we work with them and mentor them. But people make mistakes. I make mistakes, and you put your hands up to it and fix it straight away. But
account for them.
You have to take into account that there's going to be a level. You know, the whole IBM thing of like, if someone makes a mistake, the last thing you want to do is fire them. You actually want them to learn from a mistake. But you want your organisation to learn from a mistake and go, okay, these are the things. This is a post-mortem. These are the things we're going to do better next time.
Brilliant.
And then you build a robust business.
Brilliant. So, in conclusion, if you wanna start your program, listen to your insurance, or risk assess your insurance checklist. But are you seeing really that those insurance checklists are getting better?
I think they are. Yeah, I think the industry is getting wiser. It did amuse me slightly that one of the underwriters that no longer covers nation-state attacks got attacked by a nation-state recently, and therefore wouldn't have been covered under its own policy.
Interesting. Yes.
I won't say which one it was.
No, but it's clear who it was. 1 + 1 equals one to start without. But anyway,
that's the one.
In conclusion, if you want to leave the audience with like recommendation of how much security and where do they need to look at depending on their level of company, what would be your single or top 3 advice to people in startup to scale up?
You just need enough security to get by. The only problem is that's very variable.
Right.
And sometimes it changes not just from business to business, but from week to week or day to day. I think it's important to have your finger on the pulse of the security ecosystem. So what's going on in the world, the whole sort of risk landscape globally, and in your sector. But it's also important to have a finger on the pulse, your another finger, if you like, of your business and where it is in its sort of growth cycle strategy. If you're about to win a really big client, what do you need to think about? When you land that client, what are they going to need to be in place? What are you going to need to have done before that happens?
Or the exposure that you're going to get.
Yeah, exactly. Like, are you Are you going to be, if you're winning a big client or if you're winning several big clients or something as a very small startup that's been in sort of stealth mode, which is everyone's favourite kind of term, isn't it? Are you about to paint a massive target on your back? And does the target look like, is it a BlackRock size target or what sort of size target is it?
Right. So always adjust the level of security based on where you are, based on where the business is, and based on the industry where it is.
Yeah, I mean, and how much you've got to lose, right? And what losing looks like, what losing actually computes to in respect of what you're doing as a business or your principal activity.
Right.
Whether you value, whether your reputational risk attitude is actually higher than your financial risk because you're a well-funded startup, or whether you can skint,
lose everything,
or whether you're skint and you're going to have to take a few more risks because you've got to
risk reward.
You've got to keep it running. You've got to keep going. And talking to someone again yesterday about businesses winding down and what the security function, the role of a security function in a business that's failing.
Oh wow!
Which is very interesting, kind of. A business that's been compromised. So a business like FTX or a business like the one that he was talking about that he worked for as the CISO. And said, look, I've seen a couple of businesses now sort of fail while I've been there, and I've been like the last man standing, trying to stop everyone walking out the door with physical assets, digital assets, intellectual property. People just go, well, I might as well have that code base. The business is going down the pan, and we'll, for want of a better word, we'll Phoenix for business. Two people go and build a business very much like it, based on the learnings and the failures of what they kind of did, and what their investors paid for.
I guess that's a whole bag of
that's very interesting. Like I say, another adversarial landscape of like, whose interest are you now acting in?
Right.
Because ordinarily, as a CISO, as a C-suite individual, you only act in the interests of the business and yourself, because everyone's a little bit selfish and not completely stupid. But
protect yourself,
protect yourself, protect the business. But then when it's the business is going to the pits, what do you do about the people around you, the staff, the people who are the uncertainty of the people who are getting sort of screwed over?
Right.
And who does your loyalty now lie with? And who
the new buyer or
but then who do you have to answer to? Because you might have to answer some regulators. You might have to answer awkward questions from people with legal repercussions.
Right.
And so they now need to think very carefully. I know we've gone down a little bit of a dark path here,
very dark.
But you need to think very carefully about what you do next and how you navigate this.
But it's still risk against risk, right? It's risk of the business in that particular stage, regardless of the stage where it is, and what you're gonna do and how much you're gonna do it. At that point in time, you maybe are less focused on protecting client data because maybe the client data, all the clients are gone, and you're just winding up the business, and maybe you're focusing more on the infrastructure or people that are actually physical infrastructure.
Paying the Amazon bill so they don't foreclose on you, because they'll take you to bankruptcy court as soon as anyone else will. The taxman's usually the first person to take you to bankruptcy court. But I think it was Grant. We were talking to Grant Ongers yesterday.
Yes.
And he said something about if somebody in a position of authority, like a policeman, let's call them a policeman. They're not someone in an institution that's governmental or NGO and important, asked you tomorrow about your company getting breached and said, did you do everything you could to stop that happening?
Right.
Can you how honestly can you answer that question? Can you answer yes? Can you answer yes but, and what are the buts? Or would you have to be honest and say,
it depends.
I don't think I did. And if the answer is I don't think I did, then you're not doing a good enough job. If the answer is yes, but, that's almost all of us. That's pretty much, that's 99.9% of the people who are trying to do it right.
You're lying.
If you say yes, you're either seriously good or, but then why did you get breached in the first place?
Okay, on that note, Sean, thank you very much for coming on the show. This is the conclusion of our stream from Black Hat. We're running the raffle. So in half an hour, join back. Actually, 15 minutes, join us back to actually see who won the raffle at the Black Hats, who the awards. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Francesco, Sean, thank you very
Cheers,
much.
Frank.
AppSec Phoenix. Fix vulnerabilities today before attackers exploit them tomorrow.